Hey, how you doing? This is RJ. Now, I know most of you probably don't look at the screen while I blather on because I don't give you much in the way of visuals, but I'm going to ask you to look at the screen today just for a little bit and look at these two visuals that I came across the other day. Now, you have these two visuals, one of Kamala Khan holding an American flag and one of Superman holding an American flag, and both of them were tagged with the message, "Get out and vote." One was put out by Marvel and one was put out by DC. Now, I'm going to have to qualify that just a little bit because the one that was put out by DC, Superman, it was actually on the Twitter website. Whereas Marvel, I don't think had one on their actual website, but the one that was going around and being retweeted by all the Marvel pros was this one by Kamala Khan. And it was in Sana Amanat's feed, I do believe CB Sobolski's, and Joe Quesada, and all the usual suspects were just sharing this picture. Now, they were tagged with the message, "Get out and vote." I have to ask the question, first of all, which of these two pictures do you think accomplished its goal better? Superman or Kamala Khan? Now, I would say that Superman would probably be the winner here. That picture would get people to get out and vote more than Kamala Khan. Now, I have to ask why. And most people probably think to themselves, well, because Superman is an established hero. Superman has been around for a long time. He's been in television, movies. Everybody knows Superman. Nobody knows Kamala Khan. So that's the answer to that question. But I don't think that's actually relevant to this, what we're talking about here. Because, of course, these people, they chose Kamala Khan. I mean, they could have chose Captain America holding an American flag. There's plenty of those pictures out there. And if you had stacked Captain America against Superman, well, I would say Captain America would probably win that. But they chose Kamala Khan. So the fact that Superman is more established, well, that's not actually feeding into the argument because they chose Kamala Khan to promote their message of get out and vote. So Superman, I would say, wins this contest of who would actually promote people to get out and vote. So I have to ask a couple of further questions on this. The first one is, and I'd like to do an entire video on this at some point, why exactly do we need diversity? Why? Because here you have these two pictures. If Superman, as I would surmise, would actually get more people to go out and vote, that more people would be a more diverse set of people, I would say as well. So if this straight white man with superpowers actually appeals to the people more than Kamala Khan, then why do we need diversity? I mean, if it's part of the story, sure. But diversity for diversity's sake, diversity to appeal to the people, if Superman is appealing to more people than Kamala Khan, and again, that's only my assumption, I would say you can make your own assumption, but that's my assumption that I'm going to go off here, that Superman appeals to more people, then why do we need diversity? Now, the thing is, as well, the reason why I would say that Superman appeals to more people than Kamala Khan is that it is because Superman is an ideal. All right? At the very least, he is a representation of an ideal. Whereas I would say that Kamala Khan is not an ideal, but an idea. And I don't think anybody would argue with me that Superman is an ideal, or that he represents an ideal. But I'd sort of have to prove that Kamala Khan is an idea. As I'm always saying that these new heroes, they're just ideas in a mask. And their mask isn't their superhero mask. It's that they're presented as if they were characters. They're not characters. They're just ideas. Ideas in the mask of being a character. So let's go to the horse's mouth. Let's go to Sana Amanat, who is the co-creator of Kamala Khan. And Kamala Khan is supposed to be a representation of young Sana Amanat. That's what Sana Amanat said her higher-ups told her to do. That's the character that she created based on herself. And what does she say? And she said this more than once. The first time in the Fast Company video that I did a reaction to. The second time in the Women of Marvel podcast. I think it was the New York one that I also did a little bit on. And she talks about Kamala, specifically saying, Kamala's own journey is about her struggle to figure out who she is, her identity struggle, to try to stop comparing herself to those ideals that look nothing like her, nor should they. And in the Fast Company video, she talks about ideals in the same way. She talks about an unobtainable standard that Kamala should not compare herself to. These ideals, she sees no reason for Kamala to compare herself to these ideals, these unobtainable standards. And she quite specifically says at the end of the Fast Company video that superheroes are for pushing ideas. She says, we have to make sure these characters are pushing positive ideas. That's her exact quote. So to her, what a superhero is, certainly the superhero that she created, which is Kamala Khan, is for pushing ideas. She's a representation of an idea. She rejects ideals. I've given you the quotes there. She rejects the idea of ideals, and she wants Kamala Khan to be a representation of an idea, whereas Superman is a representation of an ideal. And there's a vast difference between those two things. So you want to define those things really quickly. Go back to the logical definition of it. An idea is a representation in your mind of the qualities of a specific thing. That is to say, an individual thing or an individual person. Whereas an ideal is a representation in your mind of the properties of the thing as it is a universal. So to bring it down to an easy way to think about it, if you have in your mind the picture of what a human face generally should look like, well, that's an ideal. That's a universal. Whereas if you can picture your own face without having to look in a mirror, well, then you have an idea of what your face looks like. One is specific and individual, the idea. One is non-specific and universal, the ideal. And this is why Superman wins this contest, is because Superman can appeal to everyone. And that's why we don't need diversity, because Superman can appeal to everyone. That's the thing about ideals. Ideals can appeal to everyone. It's a universal. Everyone can have that universal in their mind. Doesn't matter what color you are, doesn't matter what race you are, doesn't matter your religion, doesn't matter any of these things. Everybody can appeal to that ideal. But not everybody can appeal to that idea that Kamala Khan is trying to push. And what is that idea? Well, it's the idea that Sana Amanat is always pushing herself, and that's identity politics. You have in this picture itself, you have a picture of Kamala Khan, and she's this girl, brown-skinned, Muslim, and in back of her you have all these other women and minorities, and actually I think they're trampling on the white people in the front, saying the little caption at the top is democracy sometimes is a contact sport, because they're knocking down, I think, the white people, and all these women and minority people are going to the polls. So they're representing the idea of these minorities. So it's quite specific to these individuals. Their idea, this idea, and Sana Amanat said that these superheroes are for pushing ideas. This idea that they are pushing, it is supposed to appeal to those people, and only those people. Because an idea, not being universal, only appeals to a specific number of people. Not everybody can connect to it. And this is the reason why they exclude people from their audience. And when people read their books, like Kamala Khan, and they say, this is garbage, they answer, this book is not for you. Quite specifically, they would say, you think it's garbage because you can't understand the idea behind it, because it's not for you. Quite specifically, if you can't understand the idea, then it's not for you, and you shouldn't be reading it. Whereas Superman, since he is an ideal, and it's a universal, and everybody can appeal to the universal, that is a book for everyone. And this is the reason why Marvel's new heroes fail. And this is the reason why they will continue to fail. No matter what happens, even if they start having really good art, even if they start having some semi-good stories, in the end, these new heroes are going to fail unless they become ideals. Because I would say that comic books are based upon ideals. That it is one of the core building blocks of a comic book, is ideals. Now look at Superman. He's an ideal. Truth, justice, and the American way. Now, some people might say, but you have Marvel. Marvel is supposed to be street level, gritty, right? It's not about ideals. I would argue against that. I would say certainly they are about truth, justice, and the American way, just in the same way. They're just street level entry into those ideals. You know, Spider-Man and responsibility is the way to get to truth, justice, and the American way. You know, I would say, Daredevil, Matt Murdock, would be the greatest example of this street level kind of thinking. His street level kind of thinking came from his father, and it was, don't be a bum. And that was his entry into these higher ideals of truth, justice, and the American way. You know, that's why he became a lawyer. These ideals were instilled in him by the street level sort of notion, don't be a bum. But it's still there in ideal form. It was still universal that he could attach to. And that's the thing. But we could sit around here all day and talk about whether or not this is what they meant when they created Marvel. Now, certainly Sana Amanat and the rest, they all think that Stan Lee and the rest of the old creators, they were thinking like they think today. They always try to use their words to say, no, they meant to put out ideas, not ideals. I would argue against that. But again, we could argue until we're blue in the face about that. But if you wanted to break it down to something a little more objective, I would say, look at the fact that half of what comic books are is illustration. Now, I'd say there's a difference between cartoons and illustration. A cartoonist and an illustrator are two different things, I would say. So half of what a comic book is illustration. You know, you have the story, you have the art. And illustration is based upon ideals. It's one of the fundamental building blocks. And I have an example of this that I went through not so long ago. I bought out of the dollar bin Silk #1 or #2, I can't remember. And I read it, and I almost didn't finish reading it. And the reason was because, of course, I couldn't tell when these characters changed clothes if they were the same character. If they went from a costume to street clothes or one set of street clothes to another set of street clothes, I could not tell. And I had to flip back and read the pages over again, saying, oh, that's the same person? Now, in your mind, those two people in a comic book, if they have different clothes on, if they have a uniform or a costume on in one part of the book and street clothes on in the other part of the book, well, they're supposed to be tied to an ideal human form so that you can recognize that ideal human form. It could also be tied to stereotypes, but I'd say there's an overlap of stereotypes and ideals. So it ties into each of those two representations of this one person, tie into that ideal so that they connect in your mind in a way that you don't even have to think about it. You know that this is the same person because it's tied to an ideal. And cartoons get around this because they don't have as much depth as illustration. And they get around this by putting people in the same clothes all the time. Most cartoons have characters that never change clothes because they don't have that connection to that higher ideal because they're much more simplistic. But in illustration, you need that tie to an ideal so that these two different places are tied into this ideal that you don't need to really think about. It's already prior there in your mind, as Aristotle would say, and it's a connection that is just there so that you can tell. So I would argue that illustration, which is half of what a comic book is based upon the bedrock is ideals so that you can tie these visuals together. And if you get rid of ideals, then the entire medium is going to fail, like it is at Marvel. It is failing because not just are they misunderstanding ideals and using them in an incorrect way, it's that they're trying to get rid of them altogether. These are Sana Amanat's words. She doesn't want her characters appealing to ideals. She wants them being ideas, representations of ideas. That's what she wants. That's what she promotes. That's how she created her character. That, since she's the second in command at Marvel, would be, as I would say, the way that she asks other people to make their heroes as well. And Again, as I would argue that ideals are a fundamental building block, even if we just look at the illustrations of a comic book, then if you take out ideals, your comic book is going to collapse. And it's not going to be that medium. It's not what you think you are producing, and therefore it will fail. And that's why I think that no matter what happens in Marvel right now, even if they start doing really good stories and really good art, it's still not going to work unless they start appealing to ideals. Well, perhaps you would say that if it was really good stories and really good art, they would be appealing to ideals. Perhaps you could make that argument. But unless they start that, unless they go back to ideals, it is not going to work. It doesn't have to be high-level Superman ideals. It can be street-level, don't be a bum, Daredevil ideals. That's what Marvel has always been. But it's still about ideals. And that's what's missing in Marvel Comics today. Anyways, these two pictures just made me think about the difference between these ideas and these ideals. Hopefully, I've given you something new to think about. If I did, hit like, hit the shield in the lower right-hand corner of your screen to subscribe, and leave me a message. Tell me what you think about my argument here, whether or not you think it has merit. All right, I'll see you later. Bye.